This happened many years ago, when I worked on the 14th floor of an office building in San Francisco. I started work at around 8 a.m. before the building opened. At this time, the front doors were still locked. The front desk and security usually got there at around 8:30 a.m. I used my fob and walked to the building's first floor, which was nothing but a lobby and 6 elevators. Immediately, I saw someone standing there, right in front of those elevators. They had this huge jacket on and a hood completely covering their face. He never looked directly at me, but instead kept staring at those elevators. Usually, I was the only person in the building that early. My coworker, who also started at 8, would sometimes arrive at the same time as me, but usually I rode the elevator by myself. I walked up and pressed the up button and waited for the elevator to arrive. The person just kept standing there, completely ignoring me, in front of the furthest elevator from the entrance. Something you need to know is that the elevators are locked until the building is open. You have to put in a code, and each floor has a separate one. For instance, my floor's code would be something like 141414. If you punched it in, it would take you to the 14th floor. The other 5 elevators only go up to the 10th floor. Only elevator number 1 goes to 11 to 14. So, as I wait there, I hear this person begin whispering to themselves. They steal a glance at me, then look forward straight at the elevator again. I was getting a bit weirded out at this point. But since you need a key to even get in, I was still sort of assuming he must work there or something and was just waiting for the elevator. Elevator number 6 opens and he walks inside. I stay there waiting for elevator number 1 to get to my floor. I felt an instant feeling of relief as the door shut closed behind him. I began to hear my elevator traveling down to the lobby, when I realized that his had never started moving up. Instantly, I realized he did not work here. He clearly didn't know the code to get it to move. The doors to elevator 1 finally open. I rush in and start punching in my code immediately. Right as the doors are about to shut closed, a hand grabs them and forces them open. The man gets in, and the doors close as the elevator begins going up. He presses the button for floor 5, but it doesn't light up. The elevator just keeps on climbing and passes right by the 5th floor. He's not even looking at me, kind of whimpering and grabbing his arms, reaching into the inside of his jacket. I didn't say anything, but I moved into the corner as far away from him as possible. He kept glancing back over to me, whimpering and rocking back and forth a little, his hand now just inside his inner jacket pocket, fumbling around. Once the elevator reached the 14th floor, I booked it. He just stayed there. My office had the entire floor, but there was still another locked door to get into our lobby from the elevator. I ran towards it, with my key already in my hand. I began to try and unlock it when I realized to my horror that just like a fucking movie scene, the lock would not turn. Our doors were glass. I saw my coworker already at his desk inside, looking at me, realizing something was not right. I turned back to look behind me, only to see the man in the elevator, now sprinting full speed at me. His teeth were gritting, and he was screaming. Things felt like they were in slow motion. I started pounding helplessly on the door. Somehow, this made my key click in, and the door opened. I slammed it shut behind me as he smashed directly into it. My coworker and I called 911 right away, but the worst part was, it took them 20 minutes to arrive. We had to just stand there in front of these glass doors, watching this man who put his face right up against the glass and began licking it and screaming at us. He couldn't even leave the lobby if he wanted to, because you needed the code to get back down, so we had to just stand there and watch him until the police finally arrived and arrested him. Last December, I was visiting my family down in Florida, and we spent some time at Treasure Island. My brother and I took my dog down to the beach at around 2 a.m. to play some fetch, drink, and have a good time. If you walk along the water, you can reach a few restaurants, bars, and hotels, which all line the beach. Out of nowhere, as we were walking, we see someone begin moving pretty quickly in our direction from over there. A few moments later, we could begin to make out that they were being followed. My dog is arguably well trained. We work search and rescue after all. I've never once had her run off without permission, and never once has she not instantly returned when called. But that changed that night. She was about 5 feet away from me when I saw her hackles shoot up. I went to grab her collar, but she took off in a full sprint, making some truly terrifying barking and growling sounds. We obviously took off right after her, and she reached the first person. She stopped between them and the people behind them. She was barking and growling and lunging. Finally, I managed to catch up and put her on her leash. She never reacted in that manner before, so it was really scary. As we approached the woman, we could see that the group that was following her was composed of about 3 men that were probably in their early 30s or so. Immediately as we approached, they started booking it in the opposite direction. I turned around. I noticed the person being followed was a young woman about my age. We asked if she was okay, and she just broke down in tears and collapsed into my brother. My dog insisted she get on the ground for excited puppy kisses and a soaking wet cuddle, which they both seemed to enjoy and need. In the moment, she was far too overwhelmed to talk, so she got into her phone and rang her friend's number to have us talk to her. We were able to figure out where she was staying and walked her back to her hotel, where we met up with her friends. We all exchanged numbers to talk at a later time. The next day, we all got together. We learned that she had gone out for a walk on the beach around the same time as us and stopped for a drink at a nearby bar. She drank a bit of it and immediately was not feeling right. She left the bar because of this and soon noticed that 3 men had left after her. She had been walking for about a mile at this point, terrified and slowly getting more and more fucked up. She couldn't even remember much about the night. We knew she'd probably been on something, but we had no clue that she'd been drugged. Thankfully, we were able to help. We're still friends now, and we're all gonna meet up for spring break when we'll be back in Florida, actually. I've never been more proud of my dog, and more grateful that we were in the right place at exactly the right time. I hate even thinking about what could have happened to her. This happened in January or February of 2002. I, female, had just turned 21 at the time and was living with my father in Ohio. For context, I was extremely naive and living a pretty directionless life. I'd grown up in an affluent area of Seattle, went to a private school, went to college, and dropped out. I was dealing with major depression and partying a lot, hanging out with the wrong crowd, hooking up with random strangers. My mom really didn't know what to do with me, so she sent me to live with my dad across the country in Columbus. Now, I've been living in Ohio with my dad, and pretty much lived like an entitled teenager. I did have a job in retail, but other than that, I really sat around and didn't do much. My dad is actually an alcoholic as well, so it's not like he was of much help. At some point, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning and working a dead-end job, it kinda got me wanting to return home to Seattle. My mom, though, was unwilling to let me live with her again. So I called up my best friend at the time. Her mom was almost like my family. They didn't have a lot of money themselves, but they bought me a bus and train ticket back home. They said I could stay with them until I got back on my feet. I was extremely grateful and relieved. My dad was sad to see me go, but he agreed to drop me off at the bus station downtown. The thing is, he had to take me before his work shift. My bus actually didn't leave until later in the afternoon, so I'd basically have to wait from 9 a.m. all the way until we boarded. My dad was very nervous about leaving me there by myself. He warned me even that this station was in a rough part of Columbus, although all of Columbus is somewhat rough, and that I'd need to be extra careful. I was thinking. Yeah, okay. I was totally oblivious. My dad drove me to the Greyhound station. It was surrounded by people waiting for their buses, a few stragglers outside the entrance as well. It was quite a cold day outside. The inside was pretty much empty. My dad helped me bring my luggage in, 2 large suitcases containing pretty much all of my possessions. If I didn't want to be dragging them around with me all day, I had to pay to store them in a locker by the desk. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but I was flat broke, and I couldn't spare money for something like that. I gazed warily at the clock. My dad looked at me with sadness. I could tell he was very worried about me traveling by myself. I hugged him though and tried to look as confident as possible. We said our goodbyes and he left. I've traveled numerous times, made several trips by plane myself, and have traveled to various countries with groups as well. I was not adverse to adventure. What I was definitely not good at though was reading people. I genuinely saw the good in everyone and never had a negative experience, even at 4 a.m. in downtown Seattle. If you know anything about Seattle, it has a very robust public transportation system. I was no stranger to weirdos, drunk people, hostile exchanges between people on the bus. Usually I just ignore or continue walking. In this situation, I felt like I was totally in my element, as I'd taken public transportation many times alone. Back to the Greyhound station, I decided to go outside and have myself a cigarette. The only conundrum was I had to keep an eye on my 2 suitcases as well. I positioned them near the front desk in such a way that I could see them clearly from the entrance. I then headed outside to get my nicotine fix. I stood a bit off to the right in front of the door. I was smoking and trying to shuffle through my extremely cheap and very ugly purse, which contained my passport. Because duh, I was totally irresponsible and had lost my driver's license. As I was shuffling around though, a man in a large knitted hat came up and asked me for a cigarette. I glanced at him. Sure thing, why not? I handed him one and a light. We chatted briefly and I studied his face. He wasn't exactly unattractive, not scary looking either, maybe a bit disheveled, but I couldn't tell whether he was homeless or not really. No immediate flags is what I'm trying to say. I felt safe as the outside of the terminal was littered with people, some even smoking like me, others walking briskly to their destinations. Notably, an older gentleman was also standing opposite me on the left side of the entrance. As I was talking to the man in the hat, this older gentleman seemed to be staring at me intently. The man in the hat asked where I was from. Was I catching a bus? Even commented about the cold weather. In passing, I casually lamented that I was running low on cigarettes. He looked at me and said, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can grab some from there. I thought this through for a moment. My bus would not come for hours yet. I could easily grab a pack and be back in time. Something stopped me, however, as I remembered my luggage sitting there unattended. I said I'd think about it and turned to go back inside. Hours pass. Every once in a while, I would go back outside to smoke. The man in the hat seemed to be there every time. At one point, he even mentioned the gas station again. It's just right up there. I can take you if you want. Again, I declined. And not because I'm scared either. It's because I was worried about my luggage. Instead, I went back inside. Well, for the final time before my bus arrives, I go outside. This time, though, the street is eerily quiet. There's no one there. I grab another cigarette and place my purse on the ground by my feet. I look up. The man in the hat is right there. He asks me for money. This is where my gut finally turns, and I begin to feel uneasy. I don't have much, I can't help you. I hurriedly finished my cigarette, as I was suddenly very aware of my purse laying next to my feet exposed. I leaned over quickly to pick it up, and mumbled something about going back inside. Instead, though, the man in the hat reached out and grabbed my purse away from me. Let me help you with that. My body seemed to drain itself, and I immediately went to pull it closer to me. I'm good. Immediately, it was like a sudden switch from the harmless random dude asking for a cigarette into a nasty, vicious thief. Give me the purse, you bitch! I was struggling against him now, Desperate as I realized no one was there any longer to help me, I started screaming. The man in the hat shoved me, and his hip pushed me against the wall. "Shut the fuck up!" I was desperate now. This guy could easily pull out a knife and shank me, or even beat me up, and nobody would even be there to notice. I clung to my purse and hoped to God the cheap handles would hold together. His hands got on top of mine, and he shoved me once more. I screamed louder. From my left, I suddenly heard a voice call out, "Hey, what are you doing?" Remember the older gentleman from earlier? He seemingly stepped out of nowhere and loudly asked what was going on. I shoved the man in the hat hard with my left thigh. I think he realized in that moment if he did anything to me, he could easily be identified. He let go of my purse finally and ran off into the distance. I was shaking. I tearfully ran inside, leaving the older gentleman out there by himself. I was too frightened to say thank you. I spent the rest of the day hovering by the front desk. I thought of the 3-day trip ahead of me and shook with dread. I held my purse in my hands in a vice grip. When my time finally came to board the bus to the train station, I glanced in terror over at the other passengers. No way I was going to be sitting next to anyone now. Every person had suddenly become a potential criminal. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window. I heard a voice behind me again. "I was going to warn you, you know," said the voice. I whipped my head around. There was the older gentleman, casually sitting behind me. My eyes were probably as large as dinner plates. "I could see right away he was targeting you. You need to be more careful." I tearfully thanked him. He just stared out the window and nodded politely. We did not speak again. Honestly, that moment changed my life. My struggle with that man in the hat must have only taken 30 seconds, but the repercussions last even 20 years later. I think back to how adamant that man in the hat was about me going around the corner to the gas station. My hair still stands on end when I think about it. Would he have robbed me over a few measly dollars in my purse? Murdered me? Raped me? Who knows? It chills my blood to think about it. I spent the next 3 days paranoid and unwilling to leave my luggage unattended. I clung to my purse and used it as a pillow even on the train when laying down. When I used the restroom, I rolled my luggage into that tiny bathroom with me. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. In chilling contrast, the train trip was actually quiet and uneventful. Staring out the window as we entered Washington State, the snowfall and evergreen trees weighed down by heavy snow. I was no longer the naive and reckless young woman I had been at the Greyhound station. I had changed, just like that. So this happened 20 years ago now, but it's one of my most vivid memories I still have from my childhood. One night, my parents and my best friend's parents decided to take us out to a little neighborhood Italian restaurant for dinner. It was a cozy, quiet little place we'd been to a million times before. It was walking distance from our apartment building after all. It was set back into a little strip mall that basically completely shut down after dark except for a donut shop that stayed open quite late. This was the San Fernando Valley in the early 90s, so it was a very sleepy area. Streets were very empty during the night. Just behind the restaurant, a steep hill loomed up to form a hilly part of the city. Me, 8 years old, and my BFF, 10 years old, had just finished our food and asked to go sit in front of the restaurant on the benches by the front door. It was still within eyesight of our parents, but a little autonomy, you know. We were sitting there chatting happily, when suddenly a huge Rottweiler wearing a collar that was dragging a long broken chain behind it came walking past the restaurant, heading out of the parking lot towards the busy street that bordered it. We were really surprised to see such a big, beautiful animal just abandoned in a parking lot at night, but we let him pass by since he seemed like he knew where he was going. We also weren't about to test to see if he was friendly, since he looked an awful lot like Cujo. Only 5 minutes later, a man in an open-top Jeep drove by and stopped right in front of us. "Hey there, did you girls just see a dog pass through here? He was riding in my Jeep and he jumped off for no reason. I can't seem to find him. See, he even broke his chain." He held up a length of chain attached to one of the Jeep's roll bars. Wanting to be helpful, we said, Yeah, we saw him, he went that way." We pointed toward the busy road, but instead of following in the direction we pointed, he parked the car right in front of us. "Well, maybe he hasn't gotten too far yet. Would you girls mind helping me look?" Red flag. But, like the dumbasses we were, we said, "Sure, a lost doggy. What could be more potent to a little girl's heart?" The man told us to follow him and started heading in the opposite direction from where the dog went, into a dark service alley behind the restaurant. On one side of the little walkway was the hillside slanting up at an 80-degree angle, and on the other was the unlit industrial back of the restaurant. Just as we were beginning to follow him back behind the corner, our parents happened to be exiting at the very same moment. When they didn't immediately see us out front, they started calling our names. We told him sorry, but now we had to go. When we explained to our parents where we'd been and how we'd been helping with a dog recovery mission, my mom's head just about exploded. Both our moms actually started screaming at us for being so stupid, then screaming for where the man was. We hadn't seen him ever since we'd left him in the alley behind the restaurant. They said they were going to call the police and have him arrested, or even kill him themselves if they got their hands on him. They wouldn't believe us when we told them we had seen a dog pass right in front of us, dragging along that broken chain that exactly matched his story. But in retrospect, why would an adult man ask two little girls to help him search for his dog down an unlit back pathway? He must have planned it all.